Okay, this video is going to cover 3ds Max and its user interface. Try to go through it as fast as I can. It looks complicated, it looks crazy, but it's really not that bad. A lot of stuff is just, you can access the same thing in multiple places, and it's a lot like other programs that way, other 3D packages especially. But we'll cover each of these and the ones that we need to use and the ones that we don't. So under File here, just like in any program, there are a lot of useful things in here. Exporting and importing, saving and save as, and opening recent and all that good stuff. And I'm sure everyone knows how to use that. You can find your program preferences here, and that's something that we'll cover some other time. So, you'll use File like in any other program. In Edit, there's not a lot here that we would do that we couldn't do, with keyboard shortcuts or somewhere else in the program. So Edit's not really a useful heading. Under Tools, not a lot of things we're going to use in here either. Things that we could find somewhere else anyways. But one thing we can do is we can grab a still image of the working plane that we're in. Just like a screen capture, like you'd use a print screen in Windows. You don't have to do it that way. You can do it here, and it's just of the viewport window, so it's kind of nice. So that's about the only thing you use in Tools. Under Group, let's say you have a selection here, you go to Group, and you would just group it, and then once it's grouped, you can do something like scale it, and it would scale all together, and it'd scale just the way you want to. And since I'm here, I haven't let go of the left click while I'm scaling this around, and I really don't want to scale. So while I'm still holding that, if I just click the right click, that will it will cancel the action. So that happens in almost everything you do here in 3ds Max. If you're still holding, you can always hit that right click and cancel anything that you've done and get back to the way that you were. And then once you're done, you would select that group, and you can come back up here and you can ungroup it. So that's about all group is useful for. Under Views, there's not a lot under here that you would need to use that you wouldn't use in another more easier way somewhere else. So again, another menu that's not too useful. Under the Create, this is where you could make different standard objects and extended primitives, all this good stuff here, but all that's going to be found in our main toolbox over here, the one that we use most of the time, or in the ribbon. Modifiers are the same way. There's a full modifiers list here. This will be populated if you have an object selected. You see I can select from any number of these modifiers that are also listed up here. So that's another one that we would ignore. For RealFlight, we're not animating anything, so no animation. Graph editors, we won't be using any of those. That has a lot to do with animation as well. Rendering, there's not a lot that we need to use through this particular heading, except for maybe the render to texture, which if we're going to bake an ambient occlusion map, which would pretty much bake shadows onto the plane to make it look a little more realistic, or would make like closed off areas like the inside of a cockpit look a little darker, a little more natural. You would do that here. You might touch on environment if you want to really set up nice renders or something like that. I like to set up renders. I'll definitely be covering renders at some other time, but that's not for this one. We won't use Civil View. Customize is it'll be pretty handy. We got preferences, which is the same preferences that you'll find over here. It's just referenced once again over in the Customize menu, and you get to preferences here. But you can customize this entire user interface. So the whole thing can be customized, saved as your custom layout, and we'll touch on some of that at the end of this session here. So yeah, and we can change our units in here. So you can go from millimeters to standard inches to even generic units, something of your own specification. So it's pretty flexible that way. And under scripting, if you're a programmer and you think you could script together some nice macros or some different functionalities that aren't core to 3ds Max, then many people have, and this is where you could actually download their scripts and load their scripts and run special scripts to do things that might be actually pretty helpful, but I won't be covering any scripts. I don't use any. I've heard of them. I've tried using them before, but I don't know. It's just not totally necessary. Content, we won't really need that much. And help, there's a lot of cool things under here, obviously. Get some questions answered here. There's links to tutorials, lots of resources on learning. And let's see. There was something I wanted to touch on in here, which would have been what? Product information. Is that it? Okay, no. Resource and tools. There is a really nice keyboard shortcut map. Let me pull it on the screen over here. So this is a nice map that'll give you the full layout of all the different shortcuts that you would use. I'll be covering shortcuts at another time, but just remember by trudging through those help menus, you should be able to find a full keyboard shortcut map. And those keyboard shortcuts are customizable. You can make your own, replace the ones that exist with ones that you'd rather them be. It is 100% customizable. And over here you can see we got different workspaces available to us. This right now we have a standard workspace layout. The way that would, if you just installed 3ds Max and opened it up and had a project in here, this is exactly what it should look like normally. But again, this is where you could load your own, and then they have their own preset types, and you could explore those on your own. I usually do a custom setup, and we'll probably walk through that a little bit. Okay, good. Now, and this bar here is it's a very handy bar. We won't need the undo and redo because we'll just use Control Z and Control Y on the keyboard, which are standard undo and redo buttons or keyboard shortcut. So I don't really use those a lot myself. You may, I don't. This is a tool that we will use for 3ds in 3ds Max for real flight, and that's when we want to set up our parenting. So for real flight, the fuselage needs to be the parent of all other objects, and each object can also have its own children, and the way that you would do that is to select this tool, and I want the wing to be a child of the fuselage, and I want this aileron to be a child of the wing. So now I can go back and select just the fuselage, and you'll see those ones that got parented with it, they are now going to travel along with whatever the fuselage does. So let's step back through here and change that up so it's not the way not that way anymore. So we'll definitely be using this tool here. It's a very handy tool, and this is for unlinking. So you could unlink parented or hierarchy objects through this tool here. Space warp and selection filter won't have much use for that there. Then this next little section here, these next 4 icons are going to cover selection types and ways to select objects. So if I'm on just the regular selection, which is the way you're going to want to do that, you can hold Control and you can select different objects here. As long as you're holding Control, you continue on your selection. If you hold Alt, you'll unselect, particular ones. And it's a lot better than having one of these manipulator tools active, because if you had the move tool active and you were selecting around, and you can easily get things moved out of place, and that can become a problem. So so when you're making your selections, you're going to want to do that here. You could get a list of all your objects in the scene, and you could select objects using that list. I don't use it, but it's something you could use. Different selection marquee tools here. So this is a rectangular selection like you would use in Photoshop or any other kind of thing like that. You can get a circle here. You can get one that you I don't know, let's see, do I even use this one? Yeah, this is one that you can select like this here. There we go, and they've got a selection that way. That's good. But mainly this is just going to stay as the regular marquee select. The next one here is window crossing, or window and crossing. And the way that works is if we have the box inside the marquee, then only objects that are completely enveloped in the selection are going to be chosen. So if I select like this, only the rudder and the elevator is going to be selected because they're the only thing that's completely within that selection. And you can see that worked that way. But if we do it the other way, I can just run my selection through anything, and anything that one of these lines touch will now be selected. This button itself is not very useful because there's a way to set it up, and I'll show that to you some other time, where if I select going from my left to my right, then I have the window selection, so only things within my selection will be selected. And if I select from my right to my left, anything that the line touches will be selected. So it's just it's an automated way to use that button. And it's just in the preferences, and we'll show you how to do that some other time. Then we get into the regular tools here. So the shortcut tool for selecting is Q, and following right along Q, W, E, R on the keyboard, you'll get W will be your move tool, E is rotation, and R is scale. And you can cycle through those anytime you wish on your keyboard, and that will speed up a lot of the things that you do, especially in the early stages of making a model. Under selection, you can change under scale, you can change your scale type from scale, let's see, select and uniform scale. So it's kind of a covers it all tool, and you can do specialized tool where it's just 2 axes at once, and then you can do single axes at once. But the reason we don't need any other selection type is because when we're in this mode for scaling, we can just grab the end here and we can scale apart. We can pick a better part here. We can scale apart just along this axis, whichever one we grab, that's the one that'll be affected. We can pick just 2 by clicking this bar here that connects the 2 together, and it will only scale in those 2 directions. So I'm getting fatter and I'm getting longer at the same time with that. And then this center piece here, if all 3 of these triangles are lit up, then I'm going to scale in all axes at once. And again, I can use that right click while I'm still holding and undo, cancel what I was doing. So the scale tool's pretty handy that way. Okay, moving on to the select and place tool. So the select and place tool is where we can select this object here, and let's see, select this object, and then when we move it around, you'll see it'll follow along the surface of another object at its own pivot. And it's a good way to place one. Not in this case, wouldn't be handy, but if I was going to place switches or something on a command panel or something like that, this would be very handy because it'll just follow surfaces, and it's a pretty handy tool. Something I didn't know about for a long time. Okay, then this box right here is going to become important for things we do for real flight, for their modeling for real flight, and because we need to set pivots in 3ds Max. You'll see that this pivot is aligned to the world, or mostly to the world. Let's see, it's a little askew, but if I turn on the rotation and I'm in view, it's pretty much the world axis. And if I pivot this, it seems like the pivot has now been moved. Moving into something I really don't want to do, but okay, yeah, that worked. Yeah, so we can see now this pretty much pivots like normal, but while still in view, if I select this aileron, which you can see is quite out of the world axes, now when I go to pivot, you can see that looks pretty bad. So if I just click the drop down and go to local, meaning the local pivot of just this aileron, not the pivot of the world, now when I rotate, I'm getting a good result. So And this is the reference coordinate system, and it's an important thing. Excuse me. All right, so the next thing here is handy. People who are familiar with 3ds Max will know that when you're manipulating around an object, a lot of times I don't know what happens, but it can just disappear off the screen while you're trying to rotate, and it goes pretty wild. So this here allows you to choose different things to pivot around. So I tend to like the second selection in the drop down here, and it's use selection center, and anything that I select will become the thing that becomes pivoted around. So, and that's really handy. You're trying to design a particular object or work with a particular object, and you want to pivot on that object. You don't want it flying off the screen and trying to chase it down. So this little tool is really handy. The next two tools are not very useful. They're not anything that I use, and I won't need to cover those. This button here is the snaps toggle, and that'll come in handy with another toolbox that I'll drag out and when we customize the UI a little bit, and it'll allow me to snap things to different sub-objects within. Yeah, I mean it takes more explanation. You need to see it in person, but suffice it to say, the snaps will become a handy thing. This is just the angle snap, so that means when I'm rotating something like the spinner here, it's going to snap in increments of 5 degrees, which I think I can change that. And yeah, and it just makes it handy. I know I've turned it 20 degrees, I'll be able to turn it 20 degrees back, and everything will be back in order. Percent snaps toggle, it'll rotate by a percentage or move by a percentage, and that's fairly simple that way. Let's see, what else we got? Selection sets. So selection sets, it isn't working right now for me. I would have to reboot. I'm just seeing it now that this isn't working. But what it is if I wanted to make a selection here of multiple objects that I want to be able to easily select later as my scene becomes more complex, and I'd like to select these particular objects, I can pretty much create a folder, name that folder, add these objects into that folder, and then this box here will then give me my different folders or selection sets that I can click on and get back to easily. And that's very handy when I map all these parts. I'm going to want to make a mapped list so that I can keep getting back to my mapped parts. And when I make a collision mesh, I'll want to make a group of those. That way I can select the collision mesh easily and hide it to do further work, and it won't get in my way. So selection sets are really handy. The next tool here is the mirror tool, and we'll avoid that like the plague. It gives us a lot of problems with pivots, and we do not want to use this tool. There are two other options, ways to fix or to do the same thing without using this tool, so it's no loss. The align tool is just what you would think. You can take two objects and you can align their pivots. So if I select an object and I want to now click on quick align and then click on the next object I want to align it to, and their pivots will snap together along their orientation. So that can be handy when you're trying to assemble objects, so sometimes that is used. The Scene Explorer has something that we showed in another part. You can get to this in many different ways. Also something I don't find myself using very often. Layers, you can use Photoshop, or you can use layers just like in Photoshop, where you can create different states of the model as you go along, and they would be stored in layers and can easily be manipulated that way. But it's something that, again, I just don't really have a use for that. Curve Editor has to do with animation. We won't be using that. And the Material Editor, wait, did I miss something? I did miss some things. Here, yeah, the ribbon. Now this is the ribbon down here. This is the button to either show the ribbon or hide the ribbon. We'll cover that in a little bit, but that's what that button does. Curve Editor and the schematic view. This view will show us all of our objects and will show the parenting or hierarchy. And this is node based, meaning you can move things around and kind of lay it out in a visual way to let you know that everything is linked and done properly before you export. Save some headaches once you get to RealFlight. Okay, and then now we're getting to the material editor, and this is where we can create a material on each one of these spheres, and we can get more spheres, but each one of these can represent a separate material and can be applied to our model simply by dragging the sphere, and then obviously we'll cover this some other time, but this is where we'll be able to change colors of things, and we can just get some baked in colors that we can that will show up on the in the viewport. This is also where we would add textures, materials, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff will be here. So let's see. Yeah, that's the material editor. The next set here are the these next four I have to do with rendering, and this is I do renders for my models to post in the forums. I do renders to check to see if the geometry looks good. How did that happen? How did I disable this? I'm not going to worry about it, I guess. We'll worry about this some other time. Okay, so anyways, we can set up our rendering types in here, what size we want to render, things like that. The different lighting cases that we would use to do a render, but that's totally a video all unto itself. Suffice to say, a render is this is a working model. If I highlight this view here, I can do a quick render. I have no lights in my scene, so you're just looking at the model in black. But it's a great way to find out if I have shading errors, if I have geometry that just doesn't look right. It'll kind of show up in these renders here. Alright, and lastly down here, these are ways to set up project folders. And just to touch on what project folders are, is when you start a new project, you'll create a folder that'll have many subfolders auto-created for it, for you to keep all of your assets for your project. In our case, that would be any textures, any images that we're going to add to this, any finished things we want to use from Photoshop. All that stuff would be located all in that one folder, easy to find and easy to path from Max, and it just makes things easier. And we'll cover how that works. And this is just letting us know where that folder is. Okay, so now down to the ribbon. The ribbon is, in many ways, it's the same thing as our main toolkit here. So when I'm on this Edit tab, or any of these tabs, as a matter of fact, this ribbon will change based upon what we are selecting. So you see, we just selected it here, and we have things that we can already do with it. And we select sub selections here. That ribbon will change, and we'll find all kinds of handy tools for selecting and adding vertices, and a lot of the same things we'll find here, and maybe even some more things that we don't find over here. A little easier to access things. So yeah, this ribbon is something that is it's pretty complex. A lot of things to be dealt with there. But hey, if it's confusing, you can disable that completely. We can do all our work right here. That ribbon's it's unnecessary, but it's handy. So as you learn more and more, you may want to branch out and learn how to use some of those tools. So same thing over here now. Over here we have these tabs. This is our main toolbox. This is what we're going to use for everything we do here. And this first tab is where we're going to find all of our objects and booleans and things like that. So for instance, if I want to create a box, I'm on this tab, standard primitives. There's many different types here, but for us we're going to use pretty much just these first three selections for what we're doing for RealFlight. And under standard primitives I get these. If I want to create a box, I'm selected selected it here, and I can just draw out a square here on the grid and pull it up. And then I can do a lot of different things here by changing the size with these sliders. Just to get initial size, I can divide it up and each axis and make this a useful object that I can then bring over to the edit tab. And over here in the edit tab, we're still faced with all the same controls, which can be confusing, but it's really just so we still have more control over the object. And from here we could convert this to an edit poly, and we will find that here. So, and by adding one from the modifier list here, we're doing it a layered way, and now this is an editable poly, and I can select portions of it to do different things to, like so, and modify it and change things, and that let's see, do a few things like that, and then I can always get back to the box version, and I can still make changes if I do it this way. The other way to do that would be to delete that modifier, and all of the things that I did within that modifier disappear, and I could right click on box and go edit poly, and now I unless I control Z, I'm not getting back to that first stage, that first box that we made. And that's just a very simple way of showing how we get an object that we can then edit. And within an object we have vertices, and we have edges, and we have, let's see, if we're missing something, we have a border. So you can select open borders like so, and then you can fix things like that there. Let's see, poly lets us grab any of these polys here, anything we want to do, and then element would be if I had, let's go back here, let's create another object real quick, and I got a new object. They're inside one another, and now it's an editable poly. I go back to the first and attach this one. When you attach, you are making them all one object. They'll move together, they'll edit together, but now the element will allow us to select just that original box, and they can be separated in that way. Okay, so just went ahead and deleted. I'm not sure how that got disabled, but I'll figure that out some other time. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot more things that we'll be able to cover here once we get into a project and we're modeling something. There'll be a lot of opportunity to show off a lot of the tools here. But I would like to show, let's see, how modifiers work. So, for instance, under here we can follow down to symmetry, and I can pick a axis to do my symmetry on, and I can open up the symmetry modifier, and I can move that mirror tool to the center and flip it, and now I have a full fuselage. And if I wanted to go back to this edit poly here, and I hit the show tool, and then I went to make some changes, I would be making changes to both sides at once. So you could do it live, or you could work on just one half and then symmetry over later. And then if I were to collapse the symmetry modifier, these now would become one object again, and it's a full and complete fuselage. So let's see, yep, and I will get rid of the symmetry. Okay, so, and you can see there's plenty of things here that we can cover. There'll be smoothing groups, there'll be all that, but this is more about the UI, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so down here at the bottom, this bar here is for animation, and it's something that we won't be using. And the little coordinate system down here, this is going to be really handy because if we want to move an object, say we want to move an object here, that can be moved easily on the with these arrows here. So you can move it that way, or you can actually select the tool itself and move things along. So that's handy. If you're in rotation, you could go to absolute, and then you can type in how much rotation you'd like in a particular direction, and you'll get that to happen there. So if you there we go. Okay, so that can be handy there. That you'll see how handy that is later on when we're doing a project. These play controls we're not going to use. Auto key, that's all of this stuff here has to do with animation. Down here at the bottom, this is how we're going to control some things about our viewport. You see these different viewports can be all messed up. I can make a selection here, and then this tool here will let me zoom all of them and frame them in their respective viewports. Except for this disabled one, which I'm not sure how that happened. Oh, there we go. I clicked a button, like I always do. All right. So the zoom extents works in that way. Also, you can take a viewport. You can take the viewport at the center here, and you can change the share of the screen that each one of these viewports will take. You can grab an edge and you can drag it down. So these are totally shapeable, but you'll find that, or well, at least I've found that I only design with a single window. So select the window I like to use, and I can click this button here, and boom, I'm using a single window. And if I want to get to the other views, I can do that by selecting different keys. I can get to the front, the back, top views. I can get to all these different views individually. So let's see, this is perspective, and boom. Okay. So also within each of these viewports, I've got a different type of viewing going on. Up here is just the solid, just the wireframe. You can see completely through it. This would be solid shaded, so that you can't see through it, but there's no edges to be viewed. And this one, you can see it shaded with edges. And then in this one, we get this set to high quality, which shows us shadows, and will help us, kind of visualize our project a little bit better. Let's see, and then we have these view cubes here, which are totally customizable. We can get rid of them. We can change their size. I don't work with them at this size. I usually work with these, small, like so, something like this, or I don't work with them at all, because some of the controls that we can use would be to use your middle mouse button, click anywhere, and you'll pan around. You'll move the model around, panning. If you hold that same middle mouse button and hold Alt, you'll get a rotation. And if you middle mouse button and hit Control and Alt and move your mouse forward and back, you can zoom in and out. And if you hold Shift, you can lock movement in an axis. The first axis you move in will be the one you lock in. So Shift and move in a direction, and it gets locked in. So between these types, that's all the manipulation you really need. Okay, what else can we cover? So from here, now we can just talk a little bit about customization to make this a little more streamlined, work a little better. A lot like getting rid of the ribbon. We can do that. Anytime you see this dotted double line, that's a grip for grabbing out that window, and then we can get rid of it by hitting the X. So this window up here, it's not a window that we need all the time. We can access it somewhere else. So we could move it and put it somewhere else, but instead, by clicking in this empty space here, we can just say that we don't want the projects bar up. And we also don't need the time slider because we don't animate. So that gave us a little more room. Also, this bar across the top is a little handier if it's at the bottom. So you can drag it down to the bottom. Now things are getting a little more open, a little easier. You can always bring back that ribbon, and that ribbon is also something that can be moved. We could move our ribbon tools to the side, and we could use them from here. I wouldn't use them from there, but you could. I think they work best where they are, like so. Okay, good. Also, if you work a multiple monitor system, these can be undocked and they can be moved off screen into another monitor, and you can build all your tool sets off of the main monitor that you work on, and you could find yourself with a lot of real estate to work with. And then once you're done with and you like your setup, you can come up here and manage your workspace, and you can save as a new workspace, name it, save it to a location, and boom, you've got a customized workspace any way that you like it. So alright, I hope that helped. This is just the first of quite a few, probably, of covering some of this stuff. We'll get more in depth as we go. But alright, thanks for watching, listening.